So you don't engage in like using pornography together to, yeah. Okay.
Do you ever watch it on your own?
Mm-mm.
Have you watched it on your own?
Yeah. I mean,
And you stopped when you got married, or you stopped?
No, actually never had it, never started until after we were married. And when I discovered, wow, sex is actually a lot tougher than I realized. Not everything I thought it would be. It had been built up to be something, given I grew up in the
purity
church.
culture and all that.
Yeah, and there's some parts of that that should be jettisoned from the purity culture stuff. But there's also some truth in there. And it wasn't until after we'd been married that I had been introduced to it. And I knew it was there. It wasn't like I was naive. I just, like...
Okay, so how were you introduced to it?
There are ethical and non-ethical ways to engage in relationships.
Yeah, I think whether you're monogamous or non-monogamous or medium monogamous, like many partners, 2 partners, 10 partners, orgies, everything, like there's ethics. I think consent being number 1, which is informed consent, like all parties know what's going on, is like the first step. And yeah, honesty, like complete honesty, because otherwise nobody knows what's actually going on. And there's just like inevitable pain that will come from that. So.
And I'm really interested because knowing that you guys waited until marriage and this has been your one relationship, like when Blazer Eye has an interest in somebody else, which I think it's very natural to have feelings for other people. I'm not sure if you guys would agree with that or not, but one of the first things that happens is we tell the other person about it. And even as it progresses, if it turns into a relationship, whatever it turns into, like, we're talking about it the whole time. So there's never a feeling of like, well, who is this person now? And like, why have I not heard about them? So I'm curious how you guys handle, like, have there been times in your relationship where one of you has had a deep, close friendship with somebody of the opposite sex? And like, have there been instances of like feeling even attraction or romantic interest in somebody else? And like, do you guys disclose that, or do you talk about it, or like, how do you handle it?
Before marriage, I mean, he broke up twice with me in high school. And then when we were engaged, some girl at the Christian frat, that sounds so funny, was super, super into him. And he's like, no. And I'm like, I know girls. So that was a little rough, I think, for us. And we had to navigate that at a young age. I think, yeah, I agree with your statement that attraction is natural. For us, it's what do we do with that if we find someone attractive outside of each other. Yeah. I think we have, like you said, I don't remember any real instances. I think that if there were, we would have come to each other and said, hey, I've been thinking about this person, or I noticed them. I want to honor us and our marriage and our covenant, so let's just talk about it. Didn't lead anywhere, but I want you to be aware of these feelings. I think for a lot of marriages that we encounter, sometimes it's more on the addiction path, I think, and they just want to hide some of those feelings, they want to hide those emotions, but I'm going to go back to us.
Addiction meaning sex addiction?
Yeah, and pornography and going elsewhere outside of their relationship. And so
you don't engage in like using pornography together to, yeah, okay.
Do you ever watch it on your own? Mm-mm. Have you watched it on your own?
Yeah. I mean,
and you stopped when you got married, or you stopped?
No, actually never had it, never started until after we were married. And when I discovered, wow, sex is actually a lot tougher than I realized. Not everything I thought it would be. It had been built up to be something, given I grew up in the
purity
church.
culture and all that.
Yeah, and there's some parts of that should be jettisoned from the purity culture stuff. But there's also some truth in there. And it wasn't until after we'd been married that I had been introduced to it. And I knew it was there. It wasn't like I was naive. I just like...
Okay, so how were you introduced to it?
I was using a friend's computer to do some work because we were in college still. And I didn't have the internet because I didn't want to deal with it.
We didn't want to pay for it either.
I didn't want to pay for the internet. We were dirt poor. And I went to do a search, and when I typed in the URL, it auto-completed to some thing, and I was like, what's that? And then it just created thoughts where I was always thinking about it, and finally would go, find ways to partake on my own And then finally just realized, man, this is going nowhere good. And told Selena, and your response is, still love you. Let's work on this. Because I think...
Well, that hurt me. And
absolutely, yeah. And that was devastating to me as a husband to see my wife feel a sense of betrayal, even though I hadn't had a physical affair with somebody. Still, I had an emotional, there was
was there a clear expressed thing that, like, this is not something we'll engage in, like a tenant of the relationship, let's say, beforehand? There was an expectation so that there was a sense of betrayal, or was it just like you just assumed he wouldn't be doing something like that?
Yeah, I think there was an assumption, a naive assumption going in that, because, we're Christians and we go to church. We don't do that. And so coming to grips with, okay, we are still sinners. We're still broken. We are still struggling with what people struggle with. And so we had to confront that and have a talk of, okay, these are things that we don't want in our marriage. And we value intimacy with only each other. And anything else that comes in, we need to talk about it. We need to apologize and forgive one another if that's necessary. And we need to be clear with how far things went and if it led to anything.
Yeah. And so in this sense, there was a consensus because we had a shared value system. And so when we entered into our marriage, we were both Christian, and we both said we want to follow Christ. We care about what the Bible says. It is authoritative in our lives. Like, we read it.
Does the Bible say anything about porn, though?
It talks about lust. It talks about lusting after a woman, as it's the same thing as committing adultery with that woman. Same thing for women looking at men lustfully. And Jesus would say the same thing about anger. It says when you're angry with like kind of this wrathful anger towards somebody, it's as if you're murdering them in your heart.
So if you were watching porn really objectively as a study, like for an essay, no, I'm just kidding.
But have you ever seen porn of any kind?
I don't think I have. I mean, not on the internet. Probably. Growing up, not my parents, at other people's houses had like video, boxes
so you saw, like,
that
covers
and like pictures, but not, nothing.
But never this experience Ryan had of typing something into Google and then magically it hitting enter and hitting play and closing out of all the ads and then seeing the video.
And then pursuing it later because in your heart, like, there's a curiosity, and it does arouse something in the human heart and as a man. And so consciously choosing to say, okay, I'm going to reserve all that part of my thinking life, all that part of my physical, sexual being. I'm going to reserve that for this one woman. And you had asked if there had been I'll say aberrations, like people that we had been attracted to. You mentioned somebody that you were jealous of. I wasn't attracted to this woman. Right. And what do we do with that? And you said that attraction is normal. And I would say in a sense it is, but choosing what to do with it, I think, is what really matters. And so in those cases, I don't think we've had any serious moments where I've thought to myself, wow, I work with this person, I'm really getting close to this person, I'm actually kind of attracted to this person, what should I do? No, it's more like every time that thought came into my mind, I couldn't reconcile that with this woman that I've chosen to love her, and I've told you I will love you for our whole lives. And so how do I do that while also pursuing this? And so then I would bring it to her and say, listen, this is something that came up in my heart. Let's talk about it. Let's get through it. And by the way, I still love you. And Selena's response would always be, I love you too. Let's keep going. Let's work through it. And so, we're not immune to that.
Hey friends, Greg here with Honest Discourse. We hope that you're enjoying this conversation. We are so excited for it to continue. But first, a brief message from our sponsor.
Hey friends, Pastor Matt here with Central Church. This episode of Honest Discourse is brought to you by Central Church in Collierville, Tennessee. Central Church got behind this discussion because we really believe that this is what our world needs more of. We desperately need more understanding, more loving conversations with Christ at the center. And Central Church is a Bible-teaching, Bible-believing church in Collierville, Tennessee. We exist to multiply and to mature disciples of Jesus Christ, to produce Christ-centered relationships. And so we want to just put that offer out to you. If you're ever in the area, we sure would love to meet you. Drop by Collierville, Tennessee, and see what God is doing at Central Church. God bless. Hope to meet you in person.
A huge thank you to Central Church for sponsoring this episode. Now back to the conversation.
I wanted to ask something you brought up earlier that kind of has to do with this. You said that it's forever. It doesn't matter how she treats you or how you treat her. You'll always love each other. You'll always commit. And having experienced multiple abusive relationships in my life, for me, the love is unconditional. Like once I love someone, I really don't ever stop. So I have like hundreds of people that I have loved, and there will always be love in my heart for them. But the relationship is conditional. And so when there's a certain amount of toxicity that is very clear that it's not going to resolve, I need to know when to leave. And to that effect, like I think as you get to know someone, if you find out that ultimately what you both want from life is different, like there should be, you know, an exit plan so that you can both achieve what it is that you want. You know, if that becomes no longer, you know, tenable. But I just was curious about that for what you said you believe about, like, there's nothing that will ever change the love. I feel that way for my daughter. I think if she grew up and be a serial killer, like, I would still love her and I'd still try to help her however I could. However, she would not be living in my roof, you know?
Yeah. And that continues to be in our work that we do with married couples. That continues to be something that we wrestle through with people, because you get wives that are distraught. They're reaching out over the internet to effectively strangers. They're writing us messages through, you know, social media.
Because of the podcast.
Because of abuse.
Yeah, because they're being abused.
No,
right?
I'm saying they're reaching out to you because of the podcast you have.
So they've heard about us, they've listened to our watched videos, whatever, and they find a way to reach out and they say, what should I do? And almost always our first piece of advice to that woman, and even in some cases to the husband, is just because you're committed to the covenant still matters. It still matters, but it doesn't mean you just need to stand there in the line of fire if a husband's abusive and the wife is being beat up every night at the home. It's like, go call the cops. The dude needs to be put in jail. Like, he needs to deal with whatever issue this is. And you're right. There is a very real kind of action plan for somebody in that case. Now, would we say, hey, now you need to go get a divorce? I think I'd be very careful to say that to them, not knowing their situation, not being their pastor, not being, in a Christian sense, not being responsible for their soul. Like a pastor, we believe, is a shepherd, somebody who would walk through this with you, lovingly, compassionately, and with the full view. So in those cases, I wouldn't do that to a stranger over the internet, but we wouldn't say, just love is forever, stay there. You know, take
you're
it on
not
the
a
chin.
doormat. That's not honoring to God, and that's not loving to each other for yourself.
I wanted to raise the question that I want to at least see what you guys thought of this. The question, the prompt was, there is an ethical way and an unethical way to engage in a relationship. And we all resoundingly said, yeah, of course. And so I wanted to, I guess, dig a little deeper on that, because I'm always curious about ethics. Like, it's not clear what our cultural ethic is at the moment, right? We're all very divided. I don't mean to speak with blanket statements. It feels like we're all very divided. I'll say that. So I guess I'll word it like this. Where does your ethic stem from? And the word that I heard you use, and I think it's okay, is this idea of consent, right? There should be informed consent. This idea that a person should be able to say yes or no to something, and they should be free to say that. Why? Where does that specific ethic come from?
Yeah. I mean, I think it stems basically from a core human rights state that I think, like, much of the world tries to strive for. I think, like you said, our culture is very divided, and globally our culture is very divided. Like, there are people who grow up in completely different communities that have completely different ethics. I think, as I say with my vegan friend Elisa a lot, ethics are different for different people. And I think that's one of the beautiful things of living in this world and trying to coexist with, how many billion people are we at now? 8 billion people, is that we do have to have an understanding that looks really different for different people. But I think there's some things that, I guess, like, the more educated population can all agree are generally healthy and not healthy for people. So I think it comes from, just your understanding and your access, I guess, to information. There's lots of communities that, their ethics have almost no rights or autonomy for entire populations of people. And obviously, like, I would not think that that's good or healthy or helpful.
I think it's interesting because I think you're driving at, like, the core I'll say disagreement. Obviously, this has been very civil and polite and lovely and everything, but like the core disagreement between the two attitudes that we have up here, because like you guys believe in this thing that's bigger than yourself, these rules that have been around for so long, and that's the most important thing. And I'll speak just for me, but like I don't believe in that. So without somebody telling you what's right and wrong, it to me comes down to this idea of how would I want to be treated, and that's how I'll try and treat other people. And we all have,
Which is also in the Bible.
Sure, but we all have bodily autonomy. Like we all can understand that. Like if I inflict pain on somebody, I know that they wouldn't want that most of the time, because I know that I wouldn't want that. And so you say, why is that how it works, that consent is so important? And I think it's just because we all, like, there aren't very many universalities in life, but I think we all understand that doing something that other people don't want to you doesn't feel good, and so you shouldn't do things like that.
I agree. And you would think that, and that's why I asked the question, because this notion that a person is worth something, we agree on that here. Like we agree that if you're a person, that you're worth,
You have value.
you're valuable, you're worthwhile, and you're important, and you're worthy of some level of respect and decorum and consent. I just don't, like, the problem with not having something bigger saying that is the truth, it opens up like this very subjective view of reality that says, like, basically whatever I say is ethical, it becomes ethical. So there are many societies that wouldn't agree that people, like you said, you mentioned all the atrocities that have happened. Well, it's effectively, who is to say that they're living in an unethical life without us just imposing our...
But isn't that what you're doing? Like, aren't you imposed? Like, when you say God would feel this or Jesus would feel that, I assume you don't speak to God. You don't have conversations where you run things by him and say, hey, man, what did you think about when my cousin Steve said that thing about Jessica? Like, that was right? So isn't your interpretation of God just you're channeling kind of your own beliefs?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I think none of us are objective when it comes to, we all rely on some version of objective ethical reality as we go about our day. And the difference is who acknowledges where that comes from. Like, if we agree that it's universal, that every person should be valued the same, where is that coming from? And here's what I'm getting at is, you've heard us say this over and over again, and I know this is grating, and it's cultural Christianity right now is grating to a lot of people. To say you're a Christian nowadays is very unpopular. But the Christian ethic says...
For many reasons.
Right.
Right, but we still live in like a Christian, like, we couch out to the Christian way of life in America.
I will say
strongly.
that we live in a society heavily influenced by the Judeo-Christian version of ethics. Namely, and this is a human rights thing, that every person is made in the image of God, equal, valuable, worthwhile, important. Without that, that's where I start to struggle with, if we take that away, and we want to keep consent based on you are valuable, I don't know where that basis comes from. And to me, it opens up a whole new place to deconstruct things that our whole society is predicated on, not just the West, but the East as well, but love.
I would
truth,
actually argue that the
human
fundamentals of Christianity are not really actually set up that all people are equal. I would argue that the most prevalent fundamentals of Christianity, if you're literally taking biblical teachings, is, very patriarchal, and there's a lot of people that have no power. Children especially, I think, are taught from a very young age to exist in a system of self-loathing, which is very damaging. And then, like you even said, like a pastor being a shepherd for someone, there's like a very clear authority system where like not everyone has access to God, access to their own spiritual autonomy. So when I accepted Jesus on the toilet when I was 6 years old, I was so excited to tell my family, because that's all I'd ever been taught, that was the best thing ever. And I did. And they said, oh no, like it's not real yet. You're way too young. You have no idea what you're experiencing. You can't get baptized with your best friend. That's not healthy to me. Like, I want my own relationship to Source.